When vaccines are studied, the maximum amount of days that vaccines are studied are up to 10 days to 2 weeks. No study exists to actually evaluate the safety of a vaccine compared to a placebo group. None. And unfortunately, the vaccine manufacturers pre-select what side effects they will allow to be associated with the vaccines. So if a child has a vaccine reaction that is associated with the vaccine manufacturers will decide whether or not it should or should not be associated with the vaccine. So if your child develops seizures 5 months after a vaccine, your child is told by the doctor it had nothing to do with the vaccine. But that's not true because there are no studies to prove it. There's opinion, but there's never been a study really addressing whether a vaccination at 2 months or even 9 hours of age could be related to an event that happened months or even years later. And yet we have some of the sickest children in our country. There is no study to prove that unvaccinated children have ever been proven to start an epidemic. There are no studies proving that unvaccinated children are responsible. There's consensus. We are taught that vaccines stop the children from carrying the germs that we are vaccinating against. And study after study shows that children who are vaccinated can still carry the germ despite having received the vaccine. So, the vaccinated are still capable of spreading disease, but the unvaccinated are being unfairly blamed because of a consensus opinion, but not true science. To repeat, no study, no science has ever proven that vaccines eliminate the existence of the organism in your body. If anything, science is showing that the vaccines cause the organisms to mutate. And there are plenty of articles showing that strains are replaced by new strains after vaccination, similarly to the way antibiotics are bringing about new strains of bacteria because of the overuse of antibiotics. So why are we blaming the unvaccinated children? No study has ever been done in this country appropriately to address the health outcomes of children who are vaccinated versus the children who are unvaccinated. I have been seeing families in my practice for over 20 years that have opted out of vaccination. They are the healthiest children I have ever seen. I have families who have older children who have been vaccinated, middle children who have been partially vaccinated, and then younger children who have not been vaccinated at all. And those families are rising in number, and they see the difference between the health outcomes of their younger children who are rarely sick versus their older children needing medications and constant health issues. And all I get when I hear that, when I state something like that, is, well, that's anecdotal. Well, it's anecdotal if you see it a couple of times, but it's not anecdotal when you see it for over 20 years. And when you speak to parents, and when you speak to teachers, and when you speak to guidance counselors, and when I speak to pediatricians who are too afraid to come out in public. I took the oath of first do no harm, but when I look into the science and I don't see long-term studies, and I see only short-term studies up to 4 to 10 days where the side effects are manipulated by the manufacturers who are the only ones doing the studies on the vaccines. And when I see no placebo groups, and I see no studies of the single ingredients or the combined ingredients, and I see the science, the biochemistry of the ingredients in animal studies, where animals who are given the aluminum are found to have motor delays and behavioral problems, which is a great deal of what we're seeing in children today. I say, are we first doing no harm? And so first do no harm means the precautionary principle. In order to create herd immunity, you have to be able to prove that children who are vaccinated are immune. And the sad part about that is that whenever you vaccinate a population of children, you're always going to have a population that doesn't develop any antibodies at all. The estimates of that are about 10%, that vaccines will fail in 10% of the population. Vaccination, no antibody production. But the next group is even more suspicious, because when you vaccinate and you do produce an antibody, there is science to show that the presence of an antibody doesn't guarantee immunity either. And we don't know the percentage of children who get a vaccine, develop an antibody, but aren't immune at all. We assume that if we vaccinate, we're getting protection. We assume that if we vaccinate, we're stopping spread of disease. Those are assumptions that have never been solidified in science. I wouldn't say that if I didn't have the science to prove it. The parents that I work with in New York are very concerned that their rights are being taken away, that their knowledge about the science is being pushed away by an agenda that only says unvaccinated children are a problem. In California, when they had a measles outbreak, there were 194 cases. Of the 194 cases, 73 cases were due to the actual virus in the vaccine itself. 73, 38%. New York State did not do the proper testing that's given down by the CDC to test every child to see if the children had measles strain, wild type measles, or a mutated measles. There are cases around the country and around the world where in a 95 to 98% vaccinated population, they had measles outbreaks because they found mutated viruses. There, as I said before, there are cases where the virus mutates. New York State did not do the proper testing of the 1,000+ young children and adults who came down with measles. They wrote a little blurb on the CDC website of the 2 wild viruses that were responsible for the measles outbreak. But we in New York know that the testing was not done. 4,200 kids on Long Island had the religious exemption and were not vaccinated. And there was not one case of measles on Long Island. Thank you.